Have you ever noticed that all of the important government buildings in the US look very similar?
Yeah, most of the columns on the buildings look very similar.
Well, did you know that these buildings were affected by the Greek culture? Many of these things we do and see today are affected by the Greeks.
OMG, like engineering, art, and architectures correlate all the way back to the Greeks? That's so cool.
Well, if you look at museums, parliament houses, memorials, they all have very similar styles, especially in the columns you mentioned about. Greeks, such as the Doric and the Ionic, invented formulas as early as the 6th century, which influenced the designs today. But to start, let's go back to ancient Greece, as they were also influenced by something. Ancient Greeks designed their buildings with the gods in mind.
Did the Greeks have specific designs in their buildings?
Of course, the three earliest classical orders were the Doric, Ionic, and the Corinthian. The Doric order of architect was the earliest out of the three, and was characterized as a plain, unordered columns that rest directly on the steroblades of a temple. These columns contained an acroterion, triglyph, architrave, abacus, echinus, necking, trope, drum, and again, a steroblate where it rests.
I learned it emerged during the late 17th century and was one of the primary orders for Greek temples up until the early 6th century. Is that correct?
That's correct. Some of these designs can be found in the Parthenon, probably the most famous piece of ancient Greek architecture.
Ooh, I heard the Ionic order is located in Ionia, which is modern-day Turkey.
The Ionic order is known for its good proportions and has a more slender, skinnier profile. Its image is compared to one of a female body, and it was created in the 6th century. This is what a pillar from the Ionic order looks like. There is a pediment, which is like a roof, a ranking cornice, a frieze, where pictures are normally engraved, abacus, volute, flute, fillet, and styroblade.
I feel like I've seen this design before.
You might have seen these columns if you've ever been to Washington, D.C. These columns can be seen in the U.S. Capitol and Supreme Court building.
I remember that they are also used in the Temple of Artemis and the Temple of Hera.
The Corinthian order is more of an elaborate order between the three. The Corinthian column contains a dentil, boss, vout, rosette, ancinus, leaf, and like every other column, has a steroblade.
Huh? Leaf? Wait, I know this order was carved in the capitals and were mainly based on nature like plants. It was created in the city-state of Corinth by sculptor Callimachus, and you can find these designs in the insides and outsides of Capitol Hill.
It seems like the Greeks were influenced by a lot of architects around the world.
Yep, it's like they not only influenced architecture today, but also during Roman and neoclassical architecture.
You can also see that some of these styles of architecture inspired by the Greeks were in the University of Virginia. Most of these recent styles of architecture were used in modern architecture styles that is heavily inspired by the Corinthian order. These examples can be found in the New York City Stock Exchange, Low Library, and Columbia University.
Wait, I feel like we're forgetting one major thing about Greek architecture.
We are?
Yes, the architects.
Oh, how could I forget? Without these architects all over this world, none of this would have ever happened. Have you ever learned about Deliad?
Wasn't he mentioned in Homer's Iliad?
Yes.
What about the guy who built the Parthenon?
You mean Ichnis? Well, again, he built the Parthenon with another skilled architect, Callicrates. Ichnis continued the work studied by Callicrates and finished around 430 BC.
Seems to be a lot of influence that the Greeks had on today's architecture.
Indeed, it did have a lot of influence on modern-day society, but architecture wasn't the only thing the Greeks had an influence on. During the Hellenistic period, ancient Greek technology was at its highest point. This was because of earlier innovators made by Alexander the Great. They created things such as the Helepolis that is seen in the image above. This shows a movable siege tower, designed by Dionysius the Elder and Demetrius the Polices.
Military technology also created catapults with springs that are compressed with air.
Typhoeus made the catapults in 285 to 222 BCE.
Did you know the lighthouses we see today are inspired by the Greeks? In the port of Alexandria stood a lighthouse, and it was seen as one of the ancient wonders of this world.
It mainly contained fuel and was the entrance marker to ports.
Very similar to how we use lighthouses today.
Talking about ships and lighthouses, shipbuilding was very important. A ship called the Syracusea was given to Ptolemy III by Hieron.
There were an excessive number of ships on the Ptolemaic fleet.
Ships, how many ships would that be?
You could say about 336 warships.
Around the time that Hieron of Alexandria wrote the books on the Ottomanian, he was the mathematician and engineer. His ideas created things such as the windwheel, the first vending machine, and an entire mechanical puppet play. Let's look at Aristotle, who invented the idea of transmission of motion through circular wheels.
In better terms, it means how one ear wheel's rotation is reversed when it steers another gear wheel. During 287 through 212 BCE was another engineer named Archimedes who used a huge crane to lift the Roman ships out of the water to capsize.
The ancient Greeks had 4 different periods of art. These included the geometric, archaic, classical, and the Hellenistic. But for now, let's start off with the classical art and the Hellenistic art.
I'm sure classical art was around the time of 480 to 323 BC.
Classical art shows the beauty, harmony, and proportions that employs human figure and their relationships with the gods.
As shown in the image above, Phidias was one of the many greatest classical artists. He was born in Athens and flourished around 490 to 430 BC and was skilled at painting and sculpting.
Not much was known about Phidias' life, except that he learned sculpting from Algius of Argos, the same teacher who taught Polykleitos.
He's famous for Athena's Promachos and the Limnian Athena and the colossal Athena and the seated Zeus at the Temple of Zeus, which is located in Olympia.
Athena of Polykleitos, one of his earliest works, and placed at the Acropolis around 455 BC, standing 30 feet tall and one of the largest statues of Athena at the time. If you think that was tall, Athena Parthenon was 38 feet high and was made out of gold and ivory. This was made for Parthenon.
Speaking of Parthenon, wasn't he the art director of the building Parthenon?
Yes, exactly. Now, you see that everything ties together. Other sculptors include Praxiteles and Polykleitos.
Praxiteles was a sculptor whose only known works were Aphrodite as Nis, Hermes carrying the infant Dionysius.
Some of Polykleitos' works were Diomedes, Doryphorus, Canon, Statue of Hera. This were one of his most famous sculptures.
Enough about sculptors. What about the painters?
Well, the most known painter from ancient Greece was Apelles. Although little is known about his life, he was known as the portrait painter of Alexander the Great. Other famous portraits are a picture representing Calamity and a